Hello and welcome to Dave Makes Stuff. Today we're finishing off our Audi TT off-roader's front bumper, which we started in our previous video. So far it looks like this. If you've not watched the story so far, I've put the link below so that you can marvel at the sheer awesomeness of the operation. Well, we got the basics done, but it needs finishing off, so that's today's job. The first thing we need to do is to reinforce the corners, and for that I'm going to make a template to suit the bumper and the headlamp. And then, stop me if you've seen this one before, I'm going to... Oh wait, you have seen this before. Well, this is awkward. Do you mind if We'll keep going. I'm going to cut it out with the angle grinder. Please don't use your trousers as a work surface. Please ignore any horrific health and safety violations. That reinforcing piece will sit here and we'll have a dramatic close-up in case anyone is really hard of thinking. Not sure why that's there. And then I'm going to protect the headlamp from weld spatter with a dry and flammable cloth and tack the new metal in position. Once it's tacked down, I can realise the cloth is on fire, and then hopefully you'll bear with me while I wang an adjustable spanner around instead of going and getting a ratchet and a socket. And then, as if by magic, we're going to switch over to the other side of the bumper and start reinforcing that. I'm welding it by overlapping multiple spots, laying down one spot before the previous one has cooled. It's not necessarily the prettiest solution, but it does let you get good penetration on relatively thin stock easily. I'm watching for the way the weld pool flows to ensure that it's getting a good hold of both parts. Make no mistake, there are proper welders who would do a beautiful job of a continuous bead here, but this technique is easy and will produce a strong weld. Having finished one leg of the weld, I'm waiting for it all to cool down to try to minimise warping, and then pushing on. Hammering it for a closer fit is best done when it's already partially welded, as it tends to bend where you want it to, whereas when it's cold it just sort of rattles around and goes boing a lot. Having finished reinforcing the corners, we'll move on to the next step, which is to cap off the ends of the tubing. Sharp corners aren't a great idea, particularly on a bumper, and the open ends of these wouldn't pass an MOT inspection, which means we wouldn't be allowed on the road. So once again I'm cutting a template out, and yes, I know you've seen the next bit before, shush, I'm going to cut it out with the grinder. Again, do be careful when using a grinder if you don't want cut fingers. In seriousness, gloves help, but only to a limited extent. Getting a feel for how the grinder wants to move is what keeps the disc away from your fingers in the first place. Anyway, while I'm talking about not grinding my fingers, the bozo in the video is welding next to his fingers. Hopefully there's no more outright foolery in the immediate future. I can get on with the business of just working my way around until the weld is complete. And here we go. You know, if Leonardo da Vinci had had a welder, I reckon his first effort would probably have looked about like that. For my next trick, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to turn this piece of surplus steel flooring, at least I think that's what it is, into an upper grille to match the lower one. This is more fiddly than it looks because the upper grille leans back between the two curved tubes, which means that all of the verticals are different lengths. I'm going to start with the lower edge, which isn't too far off flat. I've given the verticals a quick off-screen trim to follow the curvature, and then I'm going to cut into each vertical so that it wraps around the tubular structure of the bumper. I cut most of the 21 in the garage with the door shut, and then it looked like this. To match the curvature of the upper tube, I marked where the grill touched it so I could trim to that. Just make sure the bottom of the grill is seated correctly, or they'll all be the wrong length, I'm told. Once I'd cut them off to match these marks, I made a little curved template and marked them all up in preparation for breaking the grinder out again. I was getting quite practiced at making little curves by this point, as these were numbers 59 to 80 on the grill as a whole, which I think is probably enough. Fun fact, at 8 times speed the angle grinder sounds almost exactly like the dentist working inside my mouth. Once said dentist was finished, it looked like quite a reasonable fit, so I went ahead and cut off the excess from the horizontal bars. At which point we were ready to weld. Not too much to say about the welding process really, except that I started in the middle and worked outwards, as I thought that would give me the best chance of escaping heat distortion problems. The other thing I'm just going to leave here, apropos of nothing in particular, is that, well, do make sure that you've properly positioned the grill before you weld it in. Well, welding's kind of permanent, and hypothetically it would be awkward to have to cut it loose and move it around and weld it back in again after you'd finished it and found that something wasn't quite aligned the way you wanted. Hypothetically speaking, of course. It would be quite sad. On to the next step. A new day, a new task, a new gigantic windstorm. It's clearly time to paint. We're using a grey etch primer because it gets a really good grip of the metalwork, or of me, or the neighbour's dog, or, whatever happens to be downwind in this storm. Once the neighbourhood is a uniform and highly durable grey. And it all had plenty of time to cure, and we'd explained to the neighbours that the grey Alsatian running around their yard really was theirs, and then we'd sorted out cleaning him up, and by that time the paint was dry enough that it was time to come back with a top coat of matte black. All the usual rules apply, don't apply too much at once or it'll run. Do put something underneath it or you'll paint your drive black, which is great. Better to go for light passes, spraying from lots of different directions to get good coverage rather than trying to nail it on in one big thick swoop. It seemed to make most sense to do the back surfaces first, as the way they look is not really so important. And then when I flipped it over to work on the front, I could have confidence that if it looked done, it was done, and there weren't any grey bits hiding around the back somewhere. I paid particular attention to the grille bars, as actually that's most of the surface area of this thing, even though they look quite skinny. And with that, we have a front bumper. It looks a lot more unified now that it's been painted, and certainly makes the front end look off-road ready. Hope you've enjoyed watching. Please subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.